Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Debra Chromy. I am President and CEO at Trellis. I am honored to be sharing the stage this morning with two really leaders in the higher education space and talking about this conversation around why students don't complete. So thank you for being here. As many of you know, we started the Trellis 360 program almost a year ago in January, and our first round or our first series was really focused on the value of post-secondary education, and that went so incredibly well. We launched a second series, and this one is really focused on barriers to completion and why people don't complete. Today, however, we're going to be focused primarily on one subset of that, which is related to student-ready institutions, processes and programs, and I think we have two great examples of that here with ACC and WGU. So I know probably neither of these individuals need introduction, but I'm going to do it anyways because...
This is the part that I always hate when
but I do want to take a minute and share Linda Battles, who I think many of you know, had spent a huge amount of time, over 20 years at the coordinating board before moving over 4 years ago to Western Governors University, where she's the regional vice president for the southern region of WGU. So excited to have you here with us. And you can speak from both perspectives, WGU as well as your time at the coordinating board. So excited to hear your perspective. And then I'm going to say Dr. Russell Lowrey-Hart once. And now I'm just going to call you Russell because that is what you prefer. You are the 9th chancellor at Austin Community College, and I believe you haven't even hit 90 days yet.
I'm on day 76.
Wow.
Oh. But who's counting?
Yes.
Right.
So I'm sure during this time you have been really on a listening tour and understanding what's going on, and then we'll develop your plan and all that. So feel free to speak from what you know about ACC today, as well as your time at Amarillo College. You spent a fair amount of time there before coming over here.
Yes.
So I think from both of those experiences, you'll be able to talk with us about what it means to be a student-ready institution. So that's going to be my first question for you. And Linda got a heads up to this, so I'm going to let her start. And that is, how do you define a student-ready institution?
That's a great question. For us at WGU, it's all about the students. We put the students at the center of everything that we do. We try to solve any issues with the student at the center. So we begin with the student, we end with the student. And the culture of the university, we say we're student obsessed because we are, and we're all there to solve those issues one by one. So I would say for us, we were created to serve students. That is our sole purpose. We don't have sports, we don't have buildings to support. All of our focus is on the students and doing it at scale. And so when 19 bipartisan governors got together in 1997 and created WGU, that is what they were solving for, was primarily the adult learner who was working, was juggling family responsibilities, and didn't have the time or the resources to attend a traditional college or university. And so they were looking to solve for how do we get more without, and in a cost-efficient way, in a student-focused way, to eliminate barriers of time and cost, and provide that flexibility and accessibility so that we can help students realize their full potential and truly deliver on the promise of higher education, which is improving an individual's social and economical mobility. So I would say that in the last 26 years, we have been really trying through trial and error, through innovation, doing the best that we can, providing a personalized learning experience for our students at scale.
And they obviously appreciated that because the numbers prove out. How many students do you have today?
So today we have 168,000 students
nationally.
Wow,
that's amazing.
We have our cumulative graduates is we've reached 350,000.
Wow.
And that's in 26 years. Here in Texas, we have 16,000 students enrolled, and we've graduated for actually at 28,000. My alumni relations specialist is saying we're at 29,000 now.
Which is great. So you were obviously filling a niche out there that wasn't being filled by
Absolutely.
Traditional higher ed, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's great. So now I'm going to turn to you, Russell. The same question. How would you define a student-ready institution?
Well, I love Linda's definition. I think you'll see a reflection in what we're trying to do here at ACC and what we did in Amarillo and what Linda just talked about. So I think being student ready really revolves around three things. One, knowing who your student actually is, not who you think she is. And I'll even say in Amarillo, we made Maria, the typical student at AC, the face of the college, and kind of a movement around being student ready. And I thought that there would be minimum real differences, if not significant differences. And what I found here at ACC is Maria is still the typical student here. 26-year-old mother working 2 part-time jobs, trying to get a skill or a degree or transfer to WGU to change the financial path for her family. And her biggest challenge is not the poverty that she's living in. Her biggest challenge is us and the processes that we inflict on her. And so knowing her and empowering her is really important. The second part is once you know who your typical student is and you're listening to her, the process we're going through right now is that an army of secret shopper Marias are writing the values for ACC. And then the third thing is a theory of change with Maria at the center of it. And the theory of change that we built in Amarillo was removing a life barrier in an accelerated learning environment and a culture of caring meant that she would complete. We'll have a different theory of change here. We have a data summit March 27th, where we're closing the college down and all 4,500 of us are meeting at the HEB Center in Cedar Park, where we'll unveil a theory of change that will include removing a life barrier, but it will have some nuanced differences that I'll preview for you. The rest of the college hasn't had this preview yet. That I think a student-ready college is looking at the data in a predictive way, and there are things that we know if students do a set of things, they're more likely to complete. What we're learning about our data is dual credit is a predictor of completing for us. Having a clear path and seeing 2 advisors in your first term is a predictor. Enrolling full-time is a predictor of success. And then engaging with some semblance of social services is a predictor of success. We'll build our theory of change around those predictions. I think those things collectively will ensure that we're ready for what Maria needs us to be.
That's great. I want to pick up on something you talked about, which is the secret shopper approach, which I think is really important, really for any institution to do, because, we see the enrollment funnel and data that Trellis has shows so many people drop out through that process. Many of them don't go anywhere.
Right.
So something has happened in that process. Can you both talk about what it is that you have done or you think needs to be done to strengthen that process, simplify that process, streamline it, provide guidance or counseling to those that are maybe have no one in their families who can help them figure out, and they drop out because they just go, well, I don't even know what to do with this. So I'll start with you, Linda.
Well, at WGU, we have
Y'all are really good at it. You really are.
Well, we use data. We have a lot of data, and we know, and we also have the human interaction with our program mentors and our instructors and our evaluators. So our students have, many touches with many support systems. So what we're seeing is when we have competency-based units, and we have 6-month terms, and students can start at the first of every month, and they start with an orientation session, which is on the 15th of the month before they start. That goes through the 5th of the following month. And in that orientation process, we have what's called a personalized learning guide, where we assess where a student is, where they're at in terms of their strengths in math, reading, writing, what their proficiency is in technology, even their typing skills, and then what their life circumstances are. What are those? What can potentially sabotage their learning journey with us, and how can we be supportive of those life factors that come into play that really impact the majority of our students? Life happens. And so our program mentors then are given that file for each of their students, and they use that to understand the student better, to integrate any kind of strategies to support their journey, and give them intervention tools. So we have a huge community of care that is available to them, that we walk them through: academic centers, resources, mental health, all kinds of resources to support them. But it's the data that we are constantly looking at in terms of on-time progress, in terms of, are they persisting from their first competency-based unit in their first 6 months to the next term. So we look at 6 months, we look at 6 weeks and 13 weeks. And so we're constantly keeping an eye on what's happening.
And then interventions?
And then the interventions come along the way. One thing that we're starting to do is even step back before they even enroll, and where they're at in terms of the prospecting process, and where they've indicated what college they want to go to. So we have 4 colleges: IT, business, teaching, and nursing. And so a lot of our students, they think they know where they want to go, and then they apply and they want to go that route. Maybe they're not ready for that. And so we have WGU Academy that provides that onboarding support, that's college readiness courses, study skills, all those other core skills that they're going to need to be successful at WGU. And then we let them know, maybe you're not ready to go into this particular program, but you could benefit from this. And so we work with them to, because we don't want to lose them, but we don't want to admit them without ensuring that they're going to be successful.
Right, and that it's a good fit, right?
Right. We again, with the students in mind, we want to make sure that they are set up for success. So there's a lot of other predictors too. Yeah. We don't want to use race and ethnicity as a predictor. We want to eliminate that. We want to create equity in higher education. But we do want to look at factors where we know if a student's at a community college, we want them to get their degree, their associate's degree, before they transfer, because we know the data show that they're going to be more successful at WGU. And by the way, we have a great partnership with ACC. I want to mention Jim Johnson, who is our strategic partnership manager, who works very closely with your team here in terms of that partnership. So
Russell, I'm assuming because you're brick and mortar, there might be some additional things that you can do on top of what Linda spoke about.
Yeah, so I hate when people use the word unpack, and now I'm about to use the word unpack. There's so much to unpack here.
Yes, there is.
There's several things that I've learned about Central Texas that worry me. And it's related to the question you just asked, but in a different location of an answer that I wasn't prepared for. I came here with an assumption about a region that I don't think I fully understood. And we had my very first trustee meeting, and one of my trustees and good friend and one of my favorite people in the world, Manny Gonzalez, was able to be a part of a conversation where we shared some data around our college and our region around this issue. Our conversion rates are not where they need to be. What I'm more worried about is if you look at Central Texas and the graduating classes for each of the last 5 years, our competition isn't between ACC and WGU or Temple or UT. Our competition's between somewhere and nowhere. And right now, nowhere is winning. There are more students graduating high school and not going anywhere than going somewhere. And when you pair that with the demographic shifts of the region, and Austin in particular, where in Austin proper, 73% of our neighbors don't have children. It's an aging population that is being priced out of the market. They're struggling to live in Austin proper. They're moving out. And they may have a degree, but they need a skill that can keep them viable. And I worry about those two demographics and that we're not set up for them. And looking at the secret shoppers, what is evident when I just ask them to go through an application process. And we've simplified our processes. It's not a bad process, but the minute there's a barrier in the process, our students never think we're the fault. They always think they're not smart enough to figure it out, and they're looking for affirmation they don't belong. And the first time they find affirmation that they're not smart enough, they bolt. And it's why those processes are so vitally important to design from an end user perspective, not from a higher ed perspective on how it integrates with our terrible colleague systems, or, like we tend to think of ourselves as trapped by the technology that we have, instead of designing the processes we need and then figuring out how to leverage the tools that are available to us.
And I think that's a really good point, because I think historically institutions have looked at tools as ways to simplify the process for them, for the administration, to be more efficient, but not necessarily more effective. And back to this whole conversation around student ready and what it means to be, it is, to your point, making it so easy for someone to come in and see themselves and be able to continue to move through that process.
Well, as my ACC colleagues have heard me talk about in our 13 campus conversations and 3 virtual town halls, we have 182 software applications at ACC. We have tried, we know things are broken, and so we have tried every tool available. And I don't think it's unique to us. I think it's unfortunately a problem in all of higher ed. I'm assuming Linda is smarter than the rest of us. That we go to a conference and we see a tool and it worked for the school, and we're like, oh, we'll try that. And we keep buying things thinking that they're the plan instead of building the plan, and then figuring out which tool. The tool's not the plan, but we tend to think of the tool as the plan, and that's where we screw up.
I'm going to test a theory with you both. There are a number of apps and software programs out there and approaches. But I think when you're looking at a particular population of individuals, much like you described, there is no replacement for the personal intervention. Am I right? Am I wrong?
You're right.
Yeah. This is the piece that I think everybody's looking for: a simple, straightforward, build an app, AI, whatever it might be. But I think this particular population really needs some hand-holding. I was at the higher ed conference yesterday and the day before that the coordinating board held, and one of the speakers spoke to the fact that, and this is Texas overall, not necessarily Central Texas, but that there are 2 million individuals who graduate from high school that don't go anywhere. And we have 4 million in this state with some college, no credential. And if we're going to get to those folks, it's going to take some type of intervention, outreach. Just want to talk about what it is that either of you have done or see potentially doing in the future to really contact those individuals and help them, especially those that have started that might be a credit or two away from completing, and helping them to move forward, or maybe just a credential in something.
I would just say quickly, when I was at Amarillo, we worked with Trellis to identify and map out, because a lot of what we learned from our students there, and I've not had these specific conversations with our students here, is that a lot of times they were dropping out for financial reasons and affordability issues and access issues, which is why I love WGU as a partner, because they can't go when faculty want to teach the class, and so they drop out, and then they never find an easier path back in. And being able to explain what your financial options are and simplify that process and reduce the time to degree, and give them, when we've reached out to them to say, listen, in our evaluation, in 12 weeks you could finish this degree, is easier to say than 2 semesters or 2 years, and give them some hope, and then provide an individual coach that will love them through the process.
You know, at my time at the coordinating board, we obviously focused on this issue of how do we get adult learners back who have some college but no credential. And what I learned there is we obviously don't want to bring them back to the same situation that they left. We have to treat them differently. We have to serve them differently to address their needs. So we created the Grad Techs initiative, where we had a consortium of colleges and universities that were dedicated to serving these students in a different way. And that included, you know, financial aid, that included a competency-based education at some institutions, online, hybrid, face-to-face. And so from those learnings, then I come over to WGU, and we're in the same situation where we don't want to create an environment that is going to turn them off. And so providing that flexibility, you know, eliminating the barriers of time and cost is so important. But we still see students leaving, and that for us is so disheartening, because we were able to attract them and enroll them, but we weren't able to keep them. And here they go again, they're even worse off. So we are trying to solve for that. And I think we are working in more partnership with employers, because I think when we have their support, when you have employer support who are interested in their upskilling and reskilling, and working with their tuition reimbursement programs, or their whatever it is that they're giving them time to be able to earn their degree at WGU, we're seeing much more success through our partners. Through our employer partners. So we partner with, you know, obviously community colleges, but healthcare organizations and facilities. We partner with school districts and major corporations, much like you do. And I think when the employer is part of that support system, we see much more success.
Yeah, so I want to pick up on that, because I think that today the education journey is nonlinear. Yeah. So it is not unusual, and to the extent that employers and industry are involved in that process, which I know both of your institutions do incredibly well. Not that there isn't more that we could do, but thinking about things like credit for prior learning, how we move people forward. They may have, Russell, they may have left ACC, but maybe they're a better fit at WGU. Yeah. So I love what you talked about with the coordinating board, that it was a group of institutions as opposed to one trying to re-enroll, because sometimes online is going to be better than going into given their particular situation. But going to this concept of nonlinear and thinking about the post-secondary ed journey differently. How much does that drive decisions that you make at your institution, or maybe will be making, about thinking about this journey very differently to really, again, get at those individuals who maybe are taking a very circuitous route, but maybe it's what works best for them?
Well, first of all, with HB8, community colleges are incentivized to in new ways, and I've often wondered why community colleges are slow to what I think you all have done really well at WGU, and understanding and building systems around credit for prior learning. And one, I just think it's capacity, and for community colleges, we tend to be really strapped and stressed. And one of the reasons I love being at ACC is that we have other challenges, but that's not one of them. But the other is because the system rewarded enrollments in classes, not success in those classes. And now HB8 is rewarding us for the completion of a degree. And I would expect that you're going to have a lot of institutions that are going to put infrastructure in place to reach out, because there is a financial incentive. There is a return on that investment. You're not, I think was always a fear of what we were losing by giving students credit for classes that we were teaching. And we looked at it as a deficit model rather than an ROI model. And I think we'll get community colleges around the state of Texas are making this intellectual shift right now that I think will produce structural shifts over the next 5 years.
And perhaps not all of your colleagues in the community college space here have the bandwidth or the ability to build out these partnerships with industry, local industry, but this really incentivizes them.
It does, and it gives them resources
to help them
do it.
Well, at WGU, we don't really do prior learning assessments. We do competency-based education. The students still need to take the course, and they have to go through the course content, and then they're assessed. But what that means that they can go at their own pace, so they can utilize the knowledge and skills and abilities that they've obtained in their jobs or in the military or whatever. And then they apply that, and so they're able to accelerate very quickly.
So they could whip through it in a month or something.
Yeah, and then they get to the content where it's all new, and that's where they start to slow down.
Yeah.
And so what we see a lot sometimes with our students who they're very motivated at the beginning of the term, and they're seeing, wow, I'm able to complete, and then they get to the tough stuff, and they've underestimated the rigor and the commitment that is needed to continue. And so sometimes we lose students because the expectations, we've not matched their expectations. And so that's why our orientations are so important, so that we do, impress on them that this is something that is challenging, that you are going to need to dedicate your time and your effort and your motivation to get through. And then our program mentors are there. They're cheerleaders to keep them on task. But I would say...
which is really a powerful model, because when the students get to that point, they already have a relationship with someone that they know and trust. It can help love them through that moment in time. And I think the rest of us are trying to catch up to that model.
I would agree. And going back to your earlier point about people dropping out because of the process, because they think it's them, you've got someone there who's saying, I believe in you.
Yes.
You can do this. I'm going to help you through this process. And I think, again, for this particular population, that's exactly what's needed. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, but I think it still goes to being student ready. And I know both of you in the past have participated, or your institutions have participated in Trellis's basic needs study. And that data shows, major issues with childcare, housing insecurity, food insecurity, all of those pieces. So thinking about that as individuals come in. There are a number of reasons, financial being one of them, but all of those pieces. And can you talk about what you do at your institutions to try and support individuals through that process? And if it becomes a major issue, if they have to walk away, how you go about trying to get them back in?
So obviously this is an issue very close to my heart, not just professionally, but personally. And I worry about it a lot. And I worked with my colleagues in Amarillo to build out a system that probably got more attention than it deserved because it was unique when it started. I'm relieved that it's not unique now. What I worry about now is, and what I found at ACC is we have all the elements. They're not glued together, they're not glued with the community, and they're not at scale. Mm-hmm. And we have to move away from this checkbox. Oh, we have food pantries, we have childcare scholarships, we help students that are homeless. And the systems have to leverage the data that we have to reach out and identify those students even before the first day of class. Right now at ACC, those systems are really predicated on the student identifying themselves. Yet we have a lot of data available to us where we could know who the students are that have kids, that have some level of financial stress. And what we know right now, 69% of our students are living in some form of financial stress, living in some form in the war on poverty, the war of poverty. And yet so much of what we built out is predicated on the student raising their hand and saying they need help and communicating in an email all of the help that's available, and then celebrating when we have 200 students a month that use the food pantry, when we have our data saying we have 20,000 students that need it. We have to build systems that don't make our students' engagement with these resources based on the luck of who they run into or which advisor they have, or if they happen to open up the right email at the right time. And then we have to glue ourselves to the community. This community has enough resources in it to solve for poverty. Yet none of those resources are glued together in a system. We all talk to each other. I've met some really incredible thought partners in this work, and we're all doing the same thing, and none of it's glued together. And so we're not sharing data, we're not sharing processes, and when you think about the social services systems that we have, it is even more laborious and scary and dangerous to fill out those applications than it is to fill out an application for college or university. And then all of those things are piecemeal. Childcare's got 3 main elements. Housing's got 5. Emergency aid, no one knows who. They're just trying to reach out to someone that will. All of them are asking for the same information. They're asking for the students to, in a really dishonoring, bureaucratic way, prove that you're really poor, right? And that you're really in distress. And so what I worry about is the number of people that throw up their hands and don't access the supports they need because the processes are so dishonoring and difficult. And as a college, we have a list of agencies that we will give to students, say, these people will help you. Good luck.
Right.
Yeah.
And luck can't be such a significant part of a student's success, and right now it is.
Yeah, we had earlier this year, we had Tamara Atkinson here, and she was talking about all the programs that she has available and how every year there is money that goes unused, and it's this piece.
So you're going to get Russell Sermon number 1.
Okay. How many are there?
There's a ton.
Okay, just checking.
In 2019, $8 billion of aid dedicated to Texans went unclaimed. $8 billion went unclaimed. we have the resources to solve for this. We just haven't been intentional in building systems around it.
You know, for us, it goes back to our program mentors who know exactly what's going on with their students. And when they see that they're not logging in for so many days, obviously they check in to see what's happening. And so that they're like the front line of the pulse of our students. We also have what's called an environmental barriers program, where we have a group of a team that is dedicated to tracking natural disasters or, you know, major catastrophes, or like the Uvalde shooting here in Texas, where they find out, okay, who lives in the vicinity, who's been impacted, which of our students and which of our employees have been impacted. And there is an immediate outreach to those individuals to see how can we help, how can we get you in touch with local support. And so having that proactive approach to knowing that our students are potentially impacting, that's going to impact their ability to complete their degree program with us. So I think it's an amazing program. And then also we have our advancement arm. Heather Marsh is with us today, who is our regional director for WGU Advancement, scholarship and emergency aid. We recently did a study in collaboration with our WGU labs that how did we use our HERF funds that came because of COVID? And we saw an 11.2% difference in completion rates for students who received those funds. So they make a difference, and we know, and we're tracking the impact that we're having to ensure that students are able to get the help that they need to be successful.
So, Russell, it seems like Linda and WGU has figured out how to solve for some of these problems. I'm going to ask you the question that you probably knew was coming with sermon number 1, which is, so if there's $8 billion out there, what's your proposal for how do we use those, how do we get those dollars out there and being used in ways that Linda just talked about? And more.
If I were
king for a day.
Yes. And we had built a version of this in Amarillo, but it was easier to do because there was relational trust between the institutions and the leaders of those institutions, and we were small enough that we could just manage things with a phone call. Didn't start there, but it ended there. So our social workers would call an agency and say, I got a student, and they're like, oh, it came from you. Send me the information on the back end, but let's get it solved now. Right now, we're just giving students lists. So if I were king for a day, there would be one data system that we all shared in a social service space and one application. And there was a version of this in the early 10s. Benefit Bank was trying to build that out. And then it tried to become a for-profit entity, and we're not going to, we cannot make money off poor people and make money off the broken bureaucracies to serve our most vulnerable populations. So one system that we're all glued to, and one central body and location that can distribute those funds based on their assessment of the student, that is built on trust rather than demanding that students perform their poverty. And I really think a lot about and worry about how much damage we're doing to people that are already traumatized just by how little trust we expect of them. And we're so worried about someone with nothing getting something when that's a really, really small percentage of the population. Yeah. Let's build a system on trust. Let's share that system, unify that system, and then let's work collectively. So if you were to look at the significant agencies in this community that are tackling this issue, not a single one of them have eradicate poverty in their mission. Our social infrastructure social services infrastructure is designed to tackle one piece of it, there's nothing gluing us together to cohesively eradicate it. And I think the opportunity we have is to leverage the resources as robustly as we can to give Maria as much financial support as she needs, and in the terms of thousands, as we learned in HERF, and tens of thousands of dollars. It will save so much money on the back end because she's only going to need those resources for 3 or 4 years. But if we can't figure this out, she's probably going to need them for 20 to 30 years. And we think in terms of now, when we need to be thinking of how we invest our resources in the short term for the biggest ROI, but that's not the way we think. So King for a Day, I'm fixing all of that, and Kristen's going to help me do it.
So, it's interesting when you talk about all of this, it brings to mind, again, I'm going to go back to our basic needs study, and we held a summit last year. I think it was at Alamo? Yeah, at Alamo Colleges. And one of the things that was really interesting that came through is that even institutions that have food banks, on the survey, students said, my institution doesn't have a food bank.
Yeah.
So there's this knowledge and getting the word out. The other thing came to really about the individual and their how they think about themselves and being self-conscious. So they didn't want anybody to see them walking into a food bank because that said something about them. So there are all these things, and I believe, and I'm looking at Allison and our research team over there, Jeff, Carla and Allison. But I remember hearing that one institution had sort of changed the model of their food bank so it looked much more like a supermarket where other people went into, and that way you as an individual, so back to your 90-10.
When you can go see a version of that on the second floor in building 1000. Yeah.
So and
it's a grocery store. It's the most beautiful honoring space. Yeah.
Exactly. But it makes people, so I think it's about, it's great that somebody raises their hand, but what we need to find are those people who don't raise their hand, that are embarrassed to raise their hand. And I think you said that you do this, and you may do this as well, which is do that sort of survey at the beginning to understand where people are, where they're coming from, build that trust so that they're willing to share with you, here are the things I'm facing, either at the beginning or somewhere along their journey, and then figuring out how do you triage to get them the support that they need.
Yeah, so one of the things that my goal is by fall of 24, we have integrated this student self-assessment that they take as a pop-up before they can log into their class and they just get to give us a self-assessment and we get to collect real-time data before the first day of class on where they are with mental health, childcare, housing, transportation, food, emergency aids. But my frustration is that we all have versions of this information, but we don't have systems to act on it. And that's what we've got to build out between now and the fall here at ACC.
Comments from you?
I would just say, I hope you accomplished that. and I wish that we had, more presidents like you, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Very appreciative. There's always more work to do. But we are at WGU, we have become in the last several years much more intentional of the audience that we are trying to attract, because our mission is to change lives for the better by creating pathways to opportunity. And that means, low income, underserved populations, low income, students of color, first generation, and rural students, military, and providing that pathway. But we have to ensure that they are also successful. But life happens, and there are so many external factors that impact their ability to succeed. And we, as an institution, are committed because we know that we believe one of our core values is in the inherent worth and talent of every individual. And one of our key results is to ensure that we are providing equity in attainment and completion. And we hold ourselves accountable to those metrics. completion, attainment, and then also factored graduate return. Because so many, I think, higher ed institutions tend to look at, well, yes, when we're asked about the value of higher education, what is it? Of course there's value. And then we tend to look at salary increases over a lifetime. But we don't tend to take into account the costs of that degree. And so for at WGU, we look at those metrics of, okay, our graduate salary at the time of graduation, 2 years post-graduation, what is that increase? What's that average increase? And then we look at, okay, their lifetime earnings, and we assume 65 is the retirement age, which, I'm almost there, maybe about 10, 15 years from now. I don't think I'm going to retire, but that's the age that we use.
I'm going to retire.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, I hope you have a long way to go.
I got 10 years.
All right, good.
And then we look at the total cost of their degree. And so for 2020, our graduates experienced 23 times over their costs in terms of their lifetime earnings. And so for us, it's changing their lives, making sure that they are socially and economically mobile because of attending WGU and completing their degree program. So that's how we operate at WGU. We're not just, it's not a one and done. We want you to come back throughout your lifetime to continue getting those credentials, those skills. And because all of our programs are skills based, we work directly with the workforce, much like community colleges do, to ensure the relevancy and to make sure that we are embedding the appropriate competencies so that they're workforce ready or promotable. So it's that bigger picture.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that, but I want to pick up on something that you spoke about earlier. Oh gosh, and now it's gone out of my head. Let's talk about workforce.
That
happens to me all the time. I'm so sorry.
But it was a really good point.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, tonight at 11 o'clock. But to the workforce piece, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, and just want to talk to you about workforce, apprenticeships, other ways, this idea, and I know there's a lot that ACC does with local industry as well as you all. So thinking about that and how we work so that there are, maybe a couple of programs or a certificate, or then they take a job, but it's a part of an ongoing path. And this partnership with employers becomes not just something that is, you got an education, you get a job, and then maybe somebody comes back and they use their 5250 to pay for it, but more of a real partnership throughout the journey, because skills are changing. The need, we were talking the last couple of days about AI, how long it took for the telephone to adapt, how long it took for all these things to be adapted. It was 2 months for AI. And the next thing that comes is going to be a week. So when you start to think about how fast things are changing, you may graduate somebody that goes into a job and 6 months later, they need upskilling or reskilling because the technology or something else has changed in terms of moving forward. So can you talk a little bit, to the extent that you're thinking about, how those partnerships might be built, not for a once and done, but from a lifelong learning perspective?
Go ahead.
Well, we've been on that for a while now.
Yeah.
That's the core of our skills-based approach. But I would say we recognize the need for short-term credentials. We embed our industry-recognized micro-credentials into our degree program so that it's within the cost of our degree programs. It's not an added.
Yep.
And so what happens is our students will come in, say like in IT, and they get in their first term all these industry-recognized certifications, and then they're eligible for a job. And so they start to work, and then they're going to WGU at the same time to complete. So we're seeing more and more the need to respond to that short-term, quick, industry-recognized credentials. So we've got our WGU. We're starting to add those micro-credentials to our portfolio. We're looking into apprenticeships. We're a little behind on that compared to community colleges, but we are looking at apprenticeships. And let's see, what was the other thing I wanted to mention? Now I have a brain gap. But
Thank you for doing that, even if it's just for me.
Go ahead and go.
Well, so I think ACC, it's one of its real strengths is the relationship and responsiveness to our industry partners, and building out apprenticeships, especially in our emerging advanced manufacturing fields and even some of our health fields. I think the challenge that we have in the higher ed space is how do we build those out in a systemic way at scale? Mm-hmm. And so much of what we're challenged by when I visit with our industry partners here is they love the program we have, but it's producing 200 and they need 1,000 or 2,000. And you saw, if you looked in the news this morning, Elon Musk going to have his own university. If we can't figure out how to be responsive, we're going to have Meta University and Apple University and Samsung University.
And in some ways we already do, where they are hiring individuals right out of high school, training them themselves. Right. Google giving certificates. They're cutting out
the middle step because we're the most laborious bureaucratic part of it. Now, what they're going to learn is that they need the other skills that students develop through our processes, but they need it on the back end. The critical thinking and the team skills and the things that you get in a liberal arts education are important, and they acknowledge that. But they need someone who can deal with the widget right now, and they're in such a crisis they can't worry about 10 years from now. We should be worrying about 10 years from now and how we can build out a non-degree based experience that can develop those skills on the back end, rather than complaining that they're taking our students from us. And how could we blame students? They're making a family-sustaining wage immediately, and our whole social fabric that's built around degrees is melting before our eyes. And we're in higher ed. I don't think WGU is doing this, but I think the general higher ed is whining about it and hoping that it'll go away, and it's not going away.
I would agree. And, one of the things that I heard yesterday is the fastest time one of the institutions that was speaking could get a new program up and running was 6 months.
Yeah.
Now, if Elon Musk can put something in place tomorrow by just taking people off of their production line and teaching the course and getting people up to speed, we have a problem in higher ed.
And so what I've already can tell you, the conversations I have with some of my colleagues across the state, SACS won't approve that. So they're looking at the accreditation to save them from themselves. Yeah. And we'll get to a point where Elon Musk will Florida SACS. It'll just become legally unnecessary. We just got to get over ourselves.
I would agree with that, because if Elon Musk produces people and they come out, is anybody going to ask whether or not they have a 2-year or 4-year degree? No, they're going to say, you worked at Tesla for 4 years or 5 years, you're hired, right? Yep. So it's so I haven't even gotten to the questions on my piece of paper, but I wanted to take an opportunity to open it up to the audience, because I can keep going to see if there's anything anyone else would like to ask of our panelists. Yes, Manny.
So, Paul said,
well, first of all, let me disclose that Manny is our regional director at WGU, and also an ACC
and my
board.
boss. Yes.
And your boss.
So leave it up to me.
I'd like to know, again, the frequency of which.
Well, as you know, Manny, we look at data every day, and we meet as a senior team across the institution on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to because our students enroll at the beginning of every month and they graduate every day, we are constantly, data is constantly moving. So we're looking at, apps, enrollments, on-time progress. We're looking at, where students are at in their journey. And so it's I think decisions are made very quickly when we start to see a trend that we're not liking the results. And so one of my roles as a vice president is to go in and talk about what's the root causes of those for our highs and lows. And what are we doing to change the trajectory of that trend?
So for my colleagues and I, my new colleagues and I, it's an everyday conversation. What I'm worried about, and we're trying to build intentional plans for, is that we don't have a culture of data at ACC. We have access to some of the most robust predictive analytics of any school in the state or the country. The infrastructure that we put in place is amazing. We're not using it. And part of the reason we're not using it is because data is scary, and so we don't want to use the data that we can't control and manipulate the story that we want it to tell, so we create our own data. And so I've been very transparent with our college thus far. We have one data source. That is our North Star. That is the receptacle of all data that we can make predictive analytic decisions around. And what we will be spending the next 2 years intentionally is building a culture of data. What I'm starting to see now is that we have people that are actually looking at data in pockets. It's not systemic or intentional, but we don't know really how to use it. And so in some of the conversations that I've been a part of in my short time, we have colleagues that the data raises a question, but it's not answering the question. And so then they're wanting another data report, and then they're wanting more because we're waiting for the data to tell us what the answer is. And the data will never tell you what the answer is. It just should inform your decisions. So helping people understand the difference between data-informed decision-making and the fallacy of data-driven decision-making, and building systems around teaching our colleagues at every level how to access it and what questions to ask of it, and when to trust your gut to know you have enough information to move forward.
So your question and your answer reminded me of the one I forgot, which I wrote down so I won't forget again. But also it reminds me of a comment Harrison Keller made over the last couple of days, which is they're now getting to data and will come out of this work with that's going to be, to your word, his word, scary.
Yeah.
It's going to uncover things that people don't want to know that are true. And then how do we respond to that, and how do we react to it? So it's not going to be pretty in some cases.
It's not going to be pretty, but how amazing and wonderful.
Yes.
Let's celebrate that.
Yes.
We've created cultures in higher education where, and I think politically and socially, where we're not allowed to admit fallibility or mistakes. So we get really defensive, and we only want people to hear the best version of ourselves. And then internally, we turn those ahas or those insights or those pain points into a version of punishment. So then we don't want to look at data because it's scary when you do, and it's punitive and it's painful. We're going to be the place that celebrates all of those ugly, painful conversations and not personalize them.
Because it's the only way you get better.
It's the only way.
It's the only way you're more effective. It's the only way you get to the outcomes that you're really trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, at WGU, we have an amazing president, Scott Pulsifer, who really leads by example. And he talks a lot about, humility and doing the best that we can. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. And so being able to say,
Steal that.
try new things is not a bad thing. We got to continue serving our students, but we also need to be able to transform our operations and our initiatives to increase that equity in higher education. So I think we are given a safe space to innovate, to experiment, to
Make mistakes. Yeah.
and then move on. And so we learn from those mistakes.
Absolutely.
And so I think having that culture where it starts at the top, and then at WGU they really invest in their leaders, and they value their leaders, and they train their leaders to be good leaders to other leaders, to just build that model internally. So that we do have a well-functioning team throughout wherever you are, working towards the same mission.
Right.
So,
Great.
And that's something we're not good at yet at ACC, but we're going to have to figure that piece out, is that leadership development, empowering our frontline employees who really know what's broken. But it is the thing that you said that I think maybe the most important thing in understanding transformation is that you've got to get the culture right. Your culture is not set. It doesn't matter. The innovations are not what create your culture. Your culture makes sure that your innovations are effective. And that's going to be the hardest work I have in front of me here.
I think for any organization, cultural change is the toughest challenge. Yes, agreed. Other questions? Yes.
It's a thought. Talking about the people go to okay.
Everybody wants to hear your question.
You don't strike me as someone who's shy. So
So back to that question of, you go to work for Elon Musk, you go to work for Tesla, and then 5 years, anybody will take you. But you're talking about now looking 10 years ahead or 20 years ahead. I feel like that creates a cycle that is a very narrow focus culture, that it doesn't allow for the things that Linda were talking about as leaders training leaders. And how does higher education, how's that going to continue to help those? So the focus is not so narrow, because I think you said no liberal arts, no culture, you have this Elon Muskism type culture.
it's its own culture.
Is
Right?
it? It's its own
is.
culture. But is that what we have to look forward to in 10 years, is all these people that are institutionalized by one person or one thought, or they only know this very narrow focus? How do we break that? Or how do we introduce or work with those institutions to make sure that they have the correct culture, that they're able to lead that they have that background in education and stuff? Because that seems awfully narrow. That a lot.
So what we're trying to do to establish the culture is our students are writing the values right now, or that will be written into every job description and every evaluation process, and will be the basis of our hiring decisions. And what we've typically done, not just at ACC, but in schools across the country, is that we hire for the experience or the technical expertise. We can build that. We need to hire for the culture that, and the culture we're trying to build is that we're going to be an institution that loves our students to success. And the values that our students are telling us, I've already previewed other things. I'm previewing more, because the college doesn't know what the values are yet. Cabinet finds out about them tomorrow on our retreat. But one of the values is courage. They feel like our employees don't have the courage to tell them that that this system is broken. We are comfortable letting the student feel like it's them, because we don't know. They are joyful is going to be one of the values. They're so scared to come on our campus, and our employees are so stressed, especially post-COVID, that we are not reflecting the joy that is to work in these amazing institutions. They're a value of yes, which is a value that our students in Amarillo wrote. Our systems and processes say no to our students every hour of the day. And we've got to build a culture that gets us to say yes to each other more than we're saying yes to our students. Determined or gritty, not for our students. I don't like the concept of grit inflicted on our students. But what our students were reflecting to us, I can't tell you how many times our students reported things that our colleagues were saying, like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like they would find a problem and they were like, I don't know what to tell you. They don't know how to fix it. But the minute there's a barrier, we judge our students because they're not tenacious enough to fight through it. But the minute we faced an institutional barrier and we don't know the answer, we're like, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. We've got to be grittier at finding a solution, not hoping the student can make their way without us. Those are things that our culture is going to be rooted in, not for our students, but how we work with each other to execute the work that we do every day. Does that make sense?
It does. People who don't have.
Yeah.
So I do have a somewhat follow-up question to your comment about changing culture. Historically, it has taken 6 to 8 years to have change. Do you have any thoughts about what you're going to do? Because you can't wait 6 to 8 years. You've only got 10 left, you told us.
Y'all
So.
listen. I came in with a 100-day plan.
Yes.
And it was really a 1-year plan.
Yes.
Like I could build enough of trust that we could give ourselves a longer runway. And it was probably day 20. And I may have told Manny this. I told some of my colleagues. I realized on day 20 that there are enough employees and students hurting that we can't wait 3 and 4 years to build out the culture. Right. There are things that we had to start doing right now. Yeah. I think fundamentally we've got 2 years to build out the culture while we're building out this theory of change. And I'm having to acknowledge, I don't like it, I'm having to acknowledge that we're going to lose some students and employees because we can't get it done fast enough. But the whole version that it takes 5 years to build out a culture,
it's not going to work.
It doesn't work.
Yep.
And it shouldn't take 2 years. And maybe we'll unlock something that will allow us to get the culture shifted within a year. I've got amazing colleagues in the room that are going to help make that happen.
That's great.
Well, and lean on Manny, because Manny is familiar with the WGU culture. We have leadership principles, cultural beliefs that really unite all of us. We do annual surveys, employee satisfaction surveys, and we did a pulse survey recently where we have 8,000 employees at WGU, a little over 8,000, and they work from home primarily, and we had almost a 70% response rate and an 87% engagement index.
Wow, that's incredible.
That's amazing.
Congratulations.
And that, I think, is a testament to the culture at WGU that we have created and built on. And it is about trust. It's about accountability. It's about inspiring and developing others. It's about really being in service to others, to our students, to our employees, and to our communities. And so I think it's a very different lens than what I had working at the coordinating board, where I saw a lot of competition. And competition, I think, breeds distrust.
Right.
And so I've learned a lot at my time at WGU. I'm very grateful. And I'm very grateful for all my colleagues for being here today.
You mentioned other-centered. That is one, I don't know that it'll end up being the word, but that was one of the values that our students voted on, was being other-centered. They
I love that.
They understand the need for that. They know they need us. We've got to get to a place where our employees feel empowered to meet that need. And right now it's very bureaucratic, and and not relational for our students.
It's interesting. So I'm reflecting on all these things I heard over the last couple of days. One other speaker talked about the fact that to be truly student-centric, you need to listen to the students. And what the students of today are saying is, I want the skills for a job, not a job, a career. The first step in a career ladder to the future. And if higher ed institutions continue to go on as they have, they're not actually listening to what their, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, customers, their students want and need. And so it doesn't mean that a job or a career is the end for them, but they're going back for an ROI. They're going back to be your outcomes based here, to have the competencies to build a career. And unfortunately, we have a lot of institutions who are not willing to accept that real change that has taken place. And every time I say the word ROI or that their students are customers, people go, no, that's not higher ed. I'm like, yes, it is.
It needs to be.
Yeah, exactly. Other questions before Yes, Steve.
About a paradox. That aren't. And that is, notwithstanding the cost, the demographic cliff in some parts of the country, the lower value that survey after survey shows Americans put on higher ed, yet the vast majority of colleges we talk to have more than enough student applications to fill up their school. Even with mediocre conversion rates, which looks to me like students are saying, I'll give you a chance. Yet sometimes the schools will say, those are fake applications, they're not real, whatever. I hear stuff. Yet I see schools that are, their population of students is declining, and yet they have thousands of applications for admission. And so I wonder, is there really a lower trust in higher ed? Is there really a scare factor? Or, what is the paradox there? How do we explain that?
Well, you raise a really good point, because we look at that every day. We get lots of applications, but the conversion rate is poor. It's not as much. If we were able to admit everybody that applied, absolutely. But I think we've tried to do through our marketing efforts is to look at why. Why aren't students wanting to enroll after they've taken the time to apply? Of course, our application process is very easy, so it's easy to apply to WGU. But there's so many variations. It depends on the individual. We hear, well, it wasn't quite. I thought you were offering a particular program, but you're not offering it, so it's a limitation on program portfolio. Or I was able to get my scholarship money from another institution in advance. I knew how much I was going to get, and at WGU, you don't know until you actually enroll. And so there's a lot of complicating factors, and I think there's capacity. So it's trying to figure out what is it going to take to convert those applications into enrollments. So we try different things at WGU. We obviously nurture those through email campaigns, and we try to give incentives in terms of, like $500 sign-up scholarships. But it's a challenge.
It is. I will say for community colleges, because I've heard it in other places, not just here at ACC. When I think it was day 4 or 5, and I'm like, I wanted to see just some basic data about enrollment and conversion rates and things of that nature. And we had a declining conversion rate. And one of the responses from one of my colleagues was, Well, it's because they're going, like, because we're in Central Texas, they're applying, but they're really going to UT and Texas State and St. Ed's. And I'm like, well, do we know that? And we now know that that's not the case. That when students apply for us at ACC and don't enroll for us, like 80 or 90% of those students are not showing up in any other Texas institution. And I don't know how we're going to crack the code on that, but that's the power that data and truth telling can have, is to challenge your assumptions. And a lot of times I think in higher ed, we cop to the assumption because it absolves us. And the data calls us to a greater sense of responsibility, and we're going to have to meet it. And then you pair that with the data of students that are less likely when they graduate from a regional high school to go to any higher education entity. It's because they're wanting an ROI. The cost is so great that they want to know they're going to be able to recoup the cost. And we have my generation and older that have this version, well, I worked my way through school, why can't they? And they're the politicians that are making policy, and they drive me nuts because they don't understand the reality of what our students are facing. And it's why PTECs and early college high schools and dual credit models are so critically important. It's not because we need a freshman in high school taking freshman in college English. It's because the cost is so great. The only way there is an ROI is if we remove as many of those cost barriers as soon as possible.
Well, and I think that this is one of the other things I heard over the last couple of days. For a particular population, they would have been better off not even attempting.
Yeah.
And if you look at the opportunity costs, the student loan debt, and what happens, and that was, again, a scary data point that you look at, given their particular situation. I wondered if you could also, this question reminded me, thinking about sort of the contrast or the paradox around the fact that I think it started with Larry Hogan in Maryland saying, for state jobs, you don't need a college degree.
Yeah.
I think Massachusetts followed, and other states as well. Over the last couple of days and last couple of months, I've been hearing all these conversations about AI and how AI is going to remove those, I'm going to use the word somebody else used yesterday, the grind jobs, those that can be automated. And my gut would be that many of the jobs that Maryland and Massachusetts and others are hiring are for those base jobs that will be replaced by technology. At the same time, we do have a demographic cliff that is coming. And we have this population that is not going anywhere. And we have this 4 million and 2 million. So when you start to look at it, and going back to your question, there is going to be a need for something, whether that is certification to get you into the first job, continuing education, et cetera. But we have a number of factors that are sort of playing at the all time, and it's coming together. I'll reference a New England perfect storm, if you will, around how all these pieces are going to play together. Does that worry you?
Yes.
And you?
Yes.
and to think about, like, when you're having this meeting, you're doing strategic planning, et cetera, and if you're looking out multiple years, how you take all those factors into consideration and thinking about where we need to be, what we need to be doing, how do we continue to say really student-ready, student-centric?
Listen, it relates to, I think, tying back to the way we started our conversation. We've got to embrace a transition to skill-based acknowledgement and learning. And I was 2 days ago, I was in our service center, and it is a few miles out, and it's employees that are focused on the behind office accounting, IT, and just the infrastructure of warehouse asset movement. And their big issue of these 70 employees is I have the skill and I have the experience. Why won't you promote me? Our own employees, and they reflected, well, we've been told we're an institution that grants degrees. We have to value our own degree. We're transitioning where the degree the skill represents is valuable. If the skill is there and hireable, and so if it's really about the skill, how do we transition away from this old model that was honestly built to sustain economic inequality? The model that higher ed was built on was built for the affluent. And skills, I think, are the ultimate equity transition. And we may not understand, we're resisting it because we're afraid that it's going to completely eradicate our model. And it should, and it needs to. But if we can't get to that shift, Elon Musk is.
Well, I agree 100%, obviously. And I think that in order to truly change the higher education ecosystem, you've got to give up on certain traditions, and one of them is semester credit hour.
Yeah.
And I think that the semester credit hour, which was created over a century ago to help salaries, faculty salaries, has evolved into measuring learning, and that's not a good indicator of learning.
Time does not equate learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's being able to demonstrate the competencies of what you're learning and pass those assessments. And so the assessments have to be really rigorous and accurate to encourage that credibility. And I think that's where we need to start. And I agree with you in terms of some institutions feeling like accreditation is sort of an excuse, but it's also a real reason for why institutions don't innovate.
Right.
And so we tend to hamstring our institutions. And I was thinking about this, and I was talking about
Were
this
you at
with...
the SACS meeting a couple of weeks ago?
No, but we are accredited by the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities because our headquarters are in Salt Lake City. But anyway,
Bless you.
we have the same issues though, and so same struggle, same mindset of how we're approaching the delivery of higher education, and it needs to change. And I will say that is what we're trying to do at a national level with government relations advocacy and a state-by-state approach. But it's going to take, I was talking to Manny and Brian earlier today. When I was at the coordinating board, I remember it was 2017 during the legislature, and Harrison Keller, Dr. Keller, was over at UT at the time and was promoting House Bill 17, which was a bill that would alleviate some institutions who are trying to innovate in the area of student success from some coordinating board rules and statutes, state statutes. It didn't impact accreditation, obviously, or federal laws. But the immediate response, I think, from us and as a bureaucrat for 17 years at the time, was there could be unintended consequences that can really hurt the students. And it's our job to protect the students. So therefore, the answer is no, we can't get on board to support that. And that it's where you sit, right? So now I'm, fast forward at WGU, and I have a totally different perspective.
Right.
And so I think that it's going to take that mind shift, from, just the conventional way of doing things to completely doing things differently. I don't know if you've had a chance to read Commencement, an era, a beginning of a new era in higher education by Joe Sallustio and Kate Colbert. but they have done a phenomenal job of summarizing over 100 president interviews.
Great book.
Yes, and so I highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't read it yet. But it's all about what institutions did during COVID to continue operations, but now what do we need to do differently to better serve the students? And I think if we have more presidents like President Russell, leading our traditional institutions, we'll get there.
I think what's so powerful about what you're doing at WGU and is that you have created a different model. And that gives me hope because it's done at scale. And most of the conversations I have with my colleagues across the country is they'll field test a skill-based something, but we're going to higher ed it, right? It's going to be small and controllable, and then I'm going to get tons of awards for it, and I'm going to get tons of press about it. But I'm not going to be crazy enough to build my whole institution around it. And we've got to have people that are crazy enough to reimagine the structures of our institution.
I would replace crazy with courage.
Yeah.
Because it takes
Thank you for
courage.
that.
It takes
does
courage.
take courage.
And if you look back in 1997, when the governors of the Western states created WGU, a lot of people called them crazy. But it was courage.
I also think of what Brenda Heller has done down at San Jacinto.
Jac.
Talk about courage.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that took incredible courage, and talk about culture change.
Yeah.
And it did take her a long time to do all that, but it created something that works so well, partnership with industry and higher ed. It was just amazing. And I think those are models that we need to look at, as to how we move forward. I think we're at time, but I'm going to double check. We are. So I think we're in a good place to end. Please join me in thanking Linda and Russell for being with us this morning and speaking so candidly about their situation. Thank you.